London. The year is 1898.
Our story begins in a newly decorated drawing room, somewhere in London, where the recently married Mrs. Banks is showing her friend, Alicia Warden, her choice of furnishings.
"I did it all in a month," said Mrs. Banks, with a graceful and very inclusive wave of her right hand over the straight tops of an extremely commonplace set of chairs, which stood about the drawing room. Alice Warden, her friend, did not fail to notice that they formed the complete suite, as it were, as suggested by the advertisers. This was what stood about the drawing room. The supplemental wave of her left hand Mrs. Banks meant to refer to the gypsy tables, of which there were 3, the whatnots, 2, the overmantel, and the etchings. In short, to all the other articles of furniture in the room. Yes, all inside a month. The curtains took longest of anything in the house. Men who come to fit up curtains and blinds do take such a time. Still, all was done inside a month. Alicia Warden glanced around the room. She wondered how it was possible to spend a whole month over such furnishings. It could easily have been done in 3 days. Perhaps 3 hours, she perceived. "You were always so clever, my dear Lil," she said to Mrs. Banks, for she would not on any account have upset her friend, who was discharging with considerable adroitness, and for the first time, the duties of hostess. "How I don't take any credit to myself," said the young bride, with a sort of pride. "Oh no, it was Charlie who was in such a hurry to get married. Poor boy! He was so dead tired of being in lodgings," he said, "and he made up his mind to have a house ready for her return from the honeymoon. Poor boy! Lodgings are so dreadful. I really think that the glimpse I had of his sitting room one evening, when he entertained Mamma and me to tea, such a tea, made me take pity on him. I should advise every man in love with a girl who cannot make up her mind to ask her with her mother to share a lodging-house tea with him. If the girl does not say yes when he gives her the chance after that, she will be the most hard-hearted of her sex." "There are a good many grades between the most hard-hearted and you," said Alicia. "I suppose you are the most soft-hearted, my dear. And were the lodgings very dreadful?" "Dreadful? Oh, dreadful is not the word," said Lil with solemnity. "The solemnity of a young bride. The solemnity of the young bride, referring to her husband's prenuptial days, of which he had naturally told her so much. I never knew anything so dismal as that sitting room. The bead mat was rampant, Alicia. There was a bride's cake ornament under a glass shade. The shade was slightly cracked, and the attempt to repair it with sticky sandpaper could hardly be called a success. And then there was the bouquet of paper flowers under another glass shade, and that rested on a mat of flat roses done in woolwork. The mat had clearly done duty for many years as a pen wiper. It was sad to see it in its old age degraded into a stand for a glass shade. Then there was an illuminated testimonial presented to the landlady's husband upon the occasion of his marriage. It hung on the wall in a rosewood frame, but most of the veneer had chipped off. It was better, however, than the gilt frame containing a steel engraving of the Empress Eugenie. Alas, the flies of a generation had made the gilt in need of renewal. Or better still, of burning, suggested Alicia. Yes, it should have been cut down from where it hung and burned, said Lil. But after all, the decorations were actually the best part of the room. You should have seen the table, the chairs, the curtains, the carpet, the wallpaper. And so you made up your mind to say yes to his proposal? Not at once. It was the tea tray, I believe, that decided me. It was of tin, and it contained a reproduction of Lancia's Monarch of the Glen, cleverly executed by a German artist. The teapot was of tin also, a thing known to commerce as block tin. I have heard of it. You made up your mind that he should have that instead, said Alicia, pointing to the very pretty, modern, Queen Anne-style tea set on a salver, which had just done duty at the bride's first at home. Oh, that was my wedding present from Father's Carters, said Mrs. Banks. Oh, yes, it is a good deal nicer, I think, than the awful set at Charlie's lodgings. And the spoons. 2 spoons, my dear, are a most awkward number when there are 3 persons sitting down to tea. In the majority of civilized countries, at least 1 spoon is allowed to every teacup. We had only 2 for the 3 of us. Charlie rang for another, and when the bell was answered, it was answered after a time, the servant brought what purported to be another, but it turned out to be only half another. It was of lead, and it got so hot at once that Charlie, who, of course, kept it for himself, he told us that it was an old friend of his, and he knew its tricks, could only take it for a single turn, like a girl at a dance whose chaperone is waiting to take her home. Said Alicia. That spoon led to your making him a happy man. Don't fancy I mean to make a vulgar pun, she said. Could any girl with a heart hold out any longer? I was not that girl anyway. Besides, the tea was smoked. Say no more, my dear. You have more than excused yourself in my eyes, and so you did all this in a month? I'm coming to that, said Mrs. Banks. Yes, the dear boy made up his mind to emancipate himself as soon as possible. That's what marriage means to a man, is it? Emancipation? Questioned Alicia. Oh, undoubtedly. He emancipated himself from the thrall of the landlady, from the abominations in the form of furniture, and from the terrors of the tea tray. His holiday was coming on, and he was resolved, after consultation with me, of course. Oh, of course. That we should not have to go for a single day into lodgings. He had had enough of lodgings. He would not even entertain the idea of a furnished house. No, he said, we should have a house of our own, furnished completely by the time we returned home from Italy. And you had it. Bravo, Charlie, said Alicia. And you are supremely happy with your house, its furniture, I am sure. How could one be otherwise? It wasn't all done in a moment, I can assure you. No. In a month, you said. But previous to that month of actual work, we had an interesting time together. Charlie got all the catalogues of furniture that are published. To glance through them was like taking a walk down Tottenham Court Road. And we pored over their pages night after night. The variety was quite bewildering, and the prices varied too. We were afraid lest we might be sacrificing quality to cheapness. And we had all along made up our minds that it would be cheaper in the long run to get everything of the best quality. There's such a lot of rubbish nowadays. Yes, a fearful lot, said her friend. But at last, after paying a few visits to the shops, we found out where the best was to be obtained, and we placed our orders there, all except for the etchings. Those Charlie managed to pick up at Spinder's. Alicia was confused. At Spinder's, she said. But Spinder's are drapers, Lil. And Charlie says that there are no better etchings to be found nowadays than those sold by the drapers. Charlie says, very truly, why shouldn't a draper be able to sell a good etching, as well as a regular print seller, who charges 5 times as much for each? It stands to reason, he says, that when a great firm like Spinder's can order a couple of thousands of one picture, and Spinder's got in 2,000 copies of that lovely Children of the Spring over there, they can afford to sell them far below what a print seller would ask. That's business, I suppose, said Alicia, glancing at the well-known etching of the village girls playing around a bump. She felt sure that the particular plate secured by Charlie Banks at Spinder's must have been the very last of the second 1,000. Ha, that's business, as you say, laughed Lil. I suppose that's why it occurred to Charlie, and not to me, to buy the etchings at Spinder's. Oh, yes, Charlie is a thorough businessman, and I knew that you'd be astonished when you saw our treasures. You may depend on my doing everything for you that is in my power, Alicia. When you are thinking of furnishing, I can give you illustrations in the catalogues of every article in this room, the dining room and the bedrooms. You shall have the benefit of my experience. How good of you to make the suggestion, said Alicia. But I fear that Reggie and I are quite too poor to spend a lot of money at once. We shall have to do our furnishings by degrees. Oh, you will find that a nuisance, said Lil. It would be far better for you to go through the catalogues. The makers have always plenty of every sweet in stock. I don't doubt it, said Alicia. They are so accommodating as to provide you with exactly what 1,000 other people have got. That's where your inexperience may strand you. There is an enormous difference in quality between one article and another. Now, there is that overmantel, for instance. Others, quite as artistic in appearance, may be bought £1 cheaper, but the quality is so dreadfully inferior that you would be sorry until the day of your death that you didn't get the more expensive one. Here comes Charlie. Ask if what I say isn't true. Her husband entered the drawing-room with Mr. Reginald Gawthorne, Alicia's fiancé. "Oh, my dear Alicia," said the latter, "Banks has been so very good as to offer to give me the address of every house where he dealt for this admirable furniture. We could have identical sets, if we please." Lil burst out laughing. "Why, you must have been saying to Mr. Gawthorne just what I have been saying to Alicia," she cried, laying her hand on her husband's shoulder, with that delightful proprietorial manner of young wives. "I've just been telling Alicia how we managed to do all that we have done so perfectly, and how we did it all inside a month." "What? Inside a month?" cried Reggie Gawthorne, turning to Alicia. He had spoken in surprise, but the surprise that he felt was nothing in comparison with that which was the result of observing the look on Alicia's face before she said, "Just think of it! Inside a month! Did you say a lunar or a calendar month, Lil?" "Oh, Miss Warden is laughing at our enthusiasm," said Charlie Banks, laughing himself as he spoke. "But never mind, dear. Her turn will come next, and then we'll have our laugh, I assure you. Miss Warden," he continued, turning to Alicia, "you could have no idea how absorbing is the work of furnishing. That is, of course, if you want to be artistic. One may furnish a house in a week, of course, if one is not particular." Alicia questioned, "But it takes a whole month to do it if you are particular?" "Oh, yes. And even then, you require to know what you are about," said he. "Seriously, it will give both Lil and me the greatest possible pleasure to do what we can for you. And I assure you I appreciate the kindness of your offer," said Alicia. "Only we're so poor. Reggie and I could never muster up enough money to buy a whole house full at a moment's notice. Whatever you do, see that you don't go to any but the most respectable houses, if you mean to try the 3 years hire system, of course," said Charlie, very seriously indeed. "Pray impress that upon Reggie, Mr. Banks," said Alicia with a laugh. Shortly afterwards she took leave of her friend Lil and her friend's husband Charlie, but she was well down the avenue leading to the railway station before she turned to her fiancé, saying, "Did you ever see anything like that furniture?" "Well, yes," he replied. "I must confess I've seen a good deal that resembled it. But think of the convenience of having a house ready for one to enter. Think of finding even the hat stand waiting for one's hat." "Oh, that hat stand!" cried Alicia. "I didn't think they were ever sold. I've seen those cards bearing the words, 'This is the only genuine shape. Refuse all hat stands but the Haddon Hall. 42 shillings 9 pence in solid carved oak.' Oh, that too solid oak would melt." "You really think it is as bad as that, Alicia?" "As bad? Worse! Oh, my dear Reggie, is it possible that your whole nature did not rise in revolt against poor Lil's furniture?" "Honestly, my dear Alicia, I thought it very nice. I thought it would serve as an example to us." "An example?" "Yes, a fearful example. A warning. That hat stand appeared to me as a danger signal, something to be avoided at all hazards. And poor Lil and her husband, thought it all so highly artistic, including the dreadful overmantel, with its fussy shelves and nooks, and the Japanese fans and the etchings chosen by the 2000 on the judgment of the proprietors of Spinder's Stores Limited. Oh, Reggie, I think I should die if you were to ask me to live in a house furnished as 10,000 other houses are furnished annually by Spinders and 100 other houses. Then I'll not take you to live in such a house. But what sort of house do you mean to live in? Any sort of a house, provided it is not like any other houses in the world. Ah, I see. Well, there won't be much difficulty in suiting you. That's one comfort. Don't be ironical, Reggie, said Alicia. I assure you that I mean what I say. I mean my house to be the house of Mrs. Reginald Gawthorne. Gracious, Reggie, haven't you discovered the value of being unlike all other writers in the world? Well, the whole value of a house consists of it being unlike all other houses. Individuality. Individuality. That is the true note of all art, whether it be the art of written history, as you do, or the art of furnishing a house properly, as we women do. He sighed. Of course you're right, my dearest, said he after a thoughtful pause. They were now in the train returning from the suburb known as Rutland Park. Of course you are right. You usually are right. But how about the money? Alicia thought. With brains, one can furnish far more cheaply than by a house furniture's catalogue, said she. Why, I have bought no fewer than 3 Chippendale chairs and a genuine Georgian set of drawers during the past year. Things that one can look on with pleasure, constant pleasure. I know the chairs and the drawers. They are decidedly pretty, said he. But 3 chairs and a Georgian chest in a year? If we didn't go a little more rapidly than that, it is going to take some time filling our house. Then the enjoyment in furnishing will be all the more prolonged. But, my love, we shall have no difficulty in picking up enough to go on before the year is out. I will take you round some of the old shops that I know, and you will very soon get to understand the good from the bad. You'll become quite enthusiastic as a collector. Yes, that's what Banks ventured to prophesy. But I venture to differ from him. That was the end of their discourse on the matter, for the time being, on the subject of art and the want of art furnishing a house. For when they reached the house in Kensington where Miss Warden lived with her mother, and when in the course of the dinner Mrs. Warden enquired what kind of drawing-room was that of their friends the Banks, Alicia only smiled and gave a look to the ceiling, the meaning of which her mother understood fully, and to which she replied with a single "Oh," the meaning of which her daughter in turn grasped without difficulty. She was far too wise a young woman to try and make humorous points by describing in her own language the iniquities of her friend's suburban villa, and Reggie Gawthorne, becoming conscious of her wisdom in this matter, admired her more than he had ever done before. As a matter of fact, the only time he had ever doubted her wisdom was when he had put it to rather a severe test by asking her if she could see her way to promise to marry him. She had at that time told him that she thought she could see her way in the direction he indicated, And it was on this account that, being a singularly clear-headed and unprejudiced man, he had had some doubt as to her wisdom. He really could not, looking at the matter from the standpoint of an unbiased critic, say that she had accepted wisely in accepting his offer. He was only moderately well off, and at that time his historical monographs had not brought him the wealth which he has since acquired through the publication of the 3 histories for the use of schools, which are now in the hands, if not the heads, of all the schoolboys, and what is more important still, of the schoolgirls in Great Britain. His income from every source in those days just enabled him to support himself in ease. Consequently, he was led to think of getting married. But his impartiality, critics of his histories have always said that his strong point was in his impartiality, forced him to feel that any young woman so beautiful as Alicia Warden undoubtedly would have been fully justified in declining to bind herself down to marry him when he had, by mentioning certain definite figures, reduced the highly honourable abstraction known as a portman to a concrete form. She had, however, accepted him, and they agreed together, with the assistance of his father, Major General Sir Arthur Gawthorne, KCB, and of course her mother, Mrs. Warden, that an excellent time to get married was after the lapse of a year. Their engagement had just been announced when her friend Lil Mahan had married that surprising young solicitor, Charles Banks. While walking homeward, he lived with his father in South Kensington. Reggie Gawthorne's mind went back, not to those episodes of the 16th century which he dealt with so successfully as to give no schoolboy an excuse for passing the period of adolescence in ignorance, but to what Alicia had said regarding the furnishing of a house. He had really always been too absorbed in his studies. For a certain amount of study is necessary before one can obtain a reputation, even as a historian, to be able to give much attention to any question as to the shape of a chairback, or the appropriateness of a particular kind of table. The frame of a mirror had never interested him greatly, and he had never thought it absolutely necessary to make up his mind as to whether Chippendale or Sheraton was the greater artist. But now he found that such questions as these had to be faced and grappled with if he meant to be happy. And his scheme of life for himself included a good deal of happiness, mainly through marrying Alicia Warden. So after looking up every article bearing, however distantly, upon the art of furniture in his encyclopedic library, and after studying with accustomed diligence the splendid volumes of Monsieur Lacroix, he went to his bed. He was, however, amazed to find that the hour was 3 o'clock. He had actually become sufficiently interested in his subject to spend more than 4 hours upon it. He had an artist friend who lived near him. There are still a few artists remaining in South Kensington. And in the morning, he strolled round to the studio of this gentleman, whose name was Harold Vincent. "Oh, hello!" cried the painter, turning his eyes for a moment from the model who was posing for him as the magnificent Sardanapalus. One can get a great deal of magnificence at the rate of £0.50 an hour. "Hello! What brings you here at this time of day?" asked the artist. But the visitor did not answer at once. He was standing with his eyes fixed upon a small chair that had once been gilt. "Where on earth did you get one of those chairs made for Madame du Barry by Le Comte?" he cried. "What? What?" said the artist. "You recognise the Le Comte chair?" He threw down his brushes and advanced to Reggie. "Let me shake you by the hand," he continued. "I have had that chair doubted before now, but I've always been ready to swear to its authenticity. You see the carving of the fleur-de-lis?" "Of course I saw that. It was designed from a piece of lace that belonged to Lorenzo de' Medici," said Reggie. "And you have seen that chair 50 times, yet never told me that you knew all about it," said the artist reproachfully. "Nonsense," said the historian. "I never set eyes on the chair until this minute." "You fool! You've sat in it a dozen times. Most chaps who come in here sit on it. They say it's not genuine. I'll floor them when I give them your opinion about it. And I fancied that you knew nothing about artistic things." Reginald Gotham did not know much about chairs, but he knew something about men, and he was well aware that the best means of obtaining a reputation for sound judgment in the eyes of a man is to agree with the judgments pronounced by that man. "Where did you get it?" he inquired. The artist wasted just 1 3 pence worth of time of his Sardanapalus, telling him the romantic story of his discovery of the chair in a small shop in a small street off the Rue de la Paix, and how he had acquired it for 15 francs. The tapestry of the seat, disclosed by the removal of the piece of barbarous velvet which was over it, was worth 4 times the money, he declared. Then he produced the piece of tapestry and held it up for the admiration of his friend. His friend did not admire it. He had read nothing about tapestry in the course of his 4 hours' research into the mysteries of furniture making. "Do you pick up many good things in this way in London?" he inquired. "Oh, now and again I make a haul," said the artist, resuming his painting. "I'm going out to have a look round this afternoon. Are you in search of anything yourself?" Reggie confessed that he had not, at that particular moment, any object of art before him which he hoped to acquire. He added, however, that if he saw anything really choice, he wouldn't mind making a bid for it. "Come along with me, then," said Mr. Vincent. "I'll leave immediately after lunch." The historian said it would delight him greatly to go, and promised to call again at the studio. He had dropped in on his friend with a view of asking his advice as to the best method of beginning a collection of good furniture, and now he felt that he was about to get his initial lesson in the art. He felt almost excited. He'd been struck by the ease with which he had assimilated the information given in a footnote in one of the pages of La Croix, and he strolled into the Cromwell Road and on to the museum. He'd never so much as glanced at the objects of furniture within the sheds, but now he wandered round and round the various departments, and with an interest which he had never fancied himself taking in the specimens of French and Italian art that are on view. He recognised without much trouble the general principles that combine to give permanent value to an article, and he appreciated to the full the consummate sense of proportion displayed by the creators of some of the antique cabinets which he examined. how it was possible for him to have been in the neighbourhood of these beautiful examples of all the qualities that contribute to the perfection of a work of art. Originality, symmetry, appropriateness, reticence, without being filled with admiration, he asked himself. The information that he imparted to his father on the subject of the true design of chair backs, as interpreted by the artist workmen of the period of Louis XV, scarcely induced the general to take a more merciful view of his son's delinquency in being 20 minutes late for lunch.